this video, we're going to continue our walkthrough of the Voxel workspace in 3D Coat by moving on from modeling and construction to the sculpting phase. Before I get started, I want to go over some of the user interface elements that are pretty important to know ahead of time before you start doing any sculpting. The first is your tool panel. As you may have noticed in the previous video, your brushes will always reside at the top of your tool panel, regardless if you're in surface mode or if you're in voxel mode. The next section is adjust, and as the name implies, it's for making adjustments or modifications to objects that are already in the scene, whereas objects help create new objects within the scene. Okay, and this surface section here is kind of a legacy addition from a number of years ago when voxels were first coming out and being developed. It had a performance penalty once you got to a high resolution stage, and Andrew developed surface mode to basically give many of the same sculpting tools, but help alleviate that performance penalty by only modifying, only manipulating that outer mesh. Okay, and this basically gives you a quick way to access a few of the basic tools. And my own personal opinion, this should be done away with now, because surface mode is already so well developed and you can switch back and forth so quickly that this really is not needed anymore. This was a big benefit at the time, because before Andrew multi-threaded the entire application, it could take a while to switch back and forth between volume mode and surface mode. So again, I think this is more legacy. You can make use of it if it's helpful for you, but now again, you can switch to either mode so quickly. This really is not all that much of a benefit. So let's move on to the next section here, and that is the command section. Res plus is the same as clicking this increase resolution icon, and it does as the name implies, it just increases the resolution. However, if you want to step up or down in resolution, make sure I'm on a layer that is visible, and I click on resample, you can see this dialog, and it shows me the original or the current amount, and as I scrub through the slider, it's telling me the amount that it will adjust to, okay, based on the percentage. And you can have, or you can use different sampling types here. I'll hit cancel. Okay, and clear will simply clear just the object from the layer. Now this is very handy if you want to start over. For example, maybe you merged a model in and it just didn't come in with enough resolution initially. You want to start over. You don't need to retype the name of your layer. You don't need to go back and have to increase the resolution amount on that layer and all that. You can leave it as it is, just clear the object itself, and then restart, maybe merge the model in again and hit apply and so on. So next selection is smoothing all, and it's going to smooth everything on that layer, and it's pretty straightforward. It's just a one operation deal, whereas in surface mode, when you click on that, you'll get some options that allow you to use different types of smoothing, and you can even select areas that you want to smooth, and it will apply it just to that local area. Okay, so let's select a layer that's already in surface mode, and you'll notice that here with your brushes, you actually have more brushes to choose from, and that also includes LiveClay. And this is a tool set that allows you to apply local subdivision in an area or local reduction of an area. And it also introduces ways to decimate if you like. For example, when you hold the shift key in other sculpting applications, it will smooth on the fly, and you could always do that in 3D Coat, but now when you're in surface mode, you have a host of options when you hold the shift key to perform different types of smoothing. So you have a standard smooth, powerful smoothing. What this does is it tries to apply optimized geometry as well as smoothing. Relax typically will just try to average the vertices. Tangent smoothing will try to maintain the shape, yet give you a more optimized geometry. So it's very subtle, and it's exceptionally good for working in high detail areas or very sharp edges where you want just a slight amount of smoothing on those edges. Okay, and reduce, just as we mentioned. Decimate, you can do this locally, and it's really powerful. And reconstruct, if you have some really difficult areas that are giving you some issues, you can use that to basically reconstruct that area. This should be add detail. I keep telling Andrew about this. The add and extra detail options are essentially the same as using the LiveClay brush with the depth value turned down to 0. That way you're just tessellating, not sculpting while brushing. Okay, so this option gives you the ability to do that on the fly by holding the Shift key. Anytime you're in surface mode, you don't have to be in any one of the LiveClay brushes. So very powerful. Now, the only thing is that when you're using the LiveClay brushes in the tool options panel here, you will have options for how much it increases under your brush. We'll have a more comprehensive tutorial series on LiveClay as well, so stay tuned for that. But nonetheless, again, you have under the Adjust section, you have the ability to modify objects in the scene, and you have some unique tools here as well, including bridge. You can paint two areas where you want to create a bridge between. And if you have holes that are created when using LiveClay, you can use that to close holes. When you use the Cutoff tool, it's not quite the same as Cutoff in volume mode. In volume mode, it's much faster, especially if you're working on a very dense object. Whereas Cutoff here is going to use LiveClay to basically decimate in that area wherever you are cutting or doing a Boolean type operation. It's going to give you more polygons on the edges and where you need it, and it's going to leave you with fewer polygons in the areas that you don't need it. But again, if you're working on a very dense mesh, you want to be careful with that. It may take a while to calculate. Alright, yeah, so objects as well. So a lot of the options that were not available a few years ago for surface mode are now available, including Vox layer. So if you want to create clothes or really skin tight, you know, elastic type of clothing on a character, or maybe use parts of a character around the arms to create armor plates for, you know, a mech warrior or soldier or something like that, Vox layer is the tool to use for that. Okay, right here. And Vox extrude will essentially extrude from the object that you have. It will stay as part of the object, but it will just extrude based on the selection that you have. So yeah, a lot of powerful tools here. Here in the toolbar, these will change contextually based on the tool that you're using and the options available for that. Now you have some new options for regularly used adjustments here, like depth. You can modify the depth curve. So you can choose default, or you can create a new one yourself. And create kind of an S curve if you like. So right click once, it will create a hard edge. Right click a second time, it will create kind of a B-spline, a weighted point. Give you a little bit softer of a curve. You can right click a third time and it will restore you to the original state. Okay. You can save and load these as you like. With the control key held down, you can always invert an action, but sometimes you want to keep it steady and not have to hold the control key all the time, so you can just check invert tool action. A steady stroke is very descriptive. It will help steady a stroke, but be careful to turn that off when you don't necessarily need it, because especially in tight areas, you know, it can mess with your stroke a bit, so make sure that's turned off. Let's choose a move tool under adjust. And what I'm going to do is on the head layer here, I'm going to hold the Alt key while clicking on the visibility icon just to isolate this head. I'm going to hit the S key to bring up the symmetry panel, and I'm just going to hide that symmetry panel and get it out of my way. It's going to leave symmetry enabled, but it's not going to be in my way. It's not going to obscure my view any further. Okay, so let's say you're wanting to create some horns on a particular model, I could use the move tool in this way. But you'll notice when I hit the wireframe hotkey, which is W, you'll notice I got a lot of stretching here. Okay, so there are a couple ways that I could attack this. One is when I'm going to do this type of operation where I know ahead of time that I'm going to stretch, I can choose to select remove stretching. So I'll undo that one time or a few times here. I'm going to check this, and what it's going to do is it's going to decimate once I finish my stroke. Okay, you can see it stretching, and then as soon as I let up, watch, it decimates to eliminate the stretching problem. And it only does it in this area where I worked. But if you go back to brushing and so on, and you notice a little pause that's getting annoying, it's probably because you have remove stretching on. So you want to undo that. Okay. Undo a few times here. Alright. So let me hide the head and switch on the body. And let's say I try to do that on the body here. Use the move tool. You can see as I finish it remeshes it, so it's nice and uniform throughout the entire stroke or throughout the entire object here. And so this is one of the benefits of working in voxels, is that it completely, just by the way it works, it always eliminates stretching. You never have to worry about topology, or you never have to worry about stretching at all. Okay, and also when working with Booleans, I'm going to undo that. Okay, and when working with Booleans, let's use the Cutoff tool. Let's choose something kind of a free form. And you'll notice it only cut a portion of the way in, and that's because in the E panel the depth limit was turned on. If you uncheck that and then make a cut, it goes all the way through. And you notice how fast it did this, but if I use the Cutoff tool in surface mode, I think I alluded to that previously, so let's go ahead and go back to the head. And let's find an area that we can cut. So under the adjust section, Cutoff. Okay, it's not too awful slow. But you'll notice it tries to give me extra polygons right here along the edges where I need it to maintain this shape. So let's be a little bit more elaborate here. Let's hit escape to finish up the spline. Right click to sharpen the point. And it really depends when you're on this little toggle. If I have B-splines initially selected, okay, when I right click, it should sharpen. Let me take that back. With it unselected, B-splines unselected, one click will sharpen. But if it's chosen, okay, it will take 2 clicks to sharpen. So you're really going through a rotation: standard spline, hard edge, and B-spline. So when you right click, you're actually cycling between those 3 different options. Okay, so let's right click twice to make that a hard selection. And I can hit apply here, or I can hit the enter key. Hit escape to drop that. I can save that shape as well. So let's say hit escape to stop the creation of the spline if I'm done. And you have a number of different options here. You can always add points as you go. You don't necessarily need to come to this little list here. You can apply, you can clear, detach from surface. Typically, if you're applying it over a surface, 3D Cut will try to attach it. That way you can rotate about if you need. Edit points table, where you can harden edges and so on according to a table. You can scale it numerically. Same thing with rotate, flip it, and so on. You can save it, load it, transform all. You have options to move it, scale it, rotate it, scale it along an axis, and so on. It's a pretty powerful tool set here. Okay, so I hit escape, drop that. And again, you can see it kept that nice hard edge by simply adding some extra polygons along those hard edges. All right. So I'll undo a few times here. Okay. So again, with voxels, you are turning on and turning off volumetric pixels in 3D space. It's literally like digital clay. And what happens is you, the viewer, will never see the voxels yourself. It's an internal calculation just for the application. But what you do see is that external mesh that conforms to whatever changes you make to that volume, and it tries to maintain an even distribution. So that is kind of counterintuitive to try and switch from an area that you've worked to apply localized tessellation or localized subdivision and then go back to a mode that's going to simply even everything back out. Anyway, let's go on now and do a little bit of brushing, but before I go any further, I want to mention that when you have gone through and you set up your brush the way you like it, and if you want to save it with all its settings and so on, you go over to the preset panel and you can store it. You can name it. Okay. And 3D Cut will show you thumbnails of not only the tool, but the draw mode that you were in, that you were using, and also a brush alpha that you may have been using as well. And it will also store, depending on the mode that you're in, it will store them in sections. You can see here, I have a section for voxels, I have a section for surface, and so on. And I'll have some for the retopo room, the paint room, if I have set up some presets for those. And I can uncheck show all presets, and what will happen is it will only show me what is available for the mode or the room that I'm in. So if you want to kind of declutter this a little bit, you can work that way. So if I go to the retopo room, only those retopo presets will be visible to me. Okay, so pretty powerful there. You can add a preset, which is basically, again, a tool or a brush with all the settings that you've chosen. And you can save an entire group of presets or entire selection that you've created. Where that's beneficial is you can share with other artists as well. And obviously your tool options is going to be something throughout the entire application based on the brush or the tool that you're using. Some may not have any options, so that's why it looks blank here. But others, let's say the transform tool, you notice it will have its own options. So this is basically like the command panel in 3ds Max or your attributes panel in Maya, something like that. Okay. So you have your presets, your tool options, your Vox tree, which is basically like an outliner or layer panel. And while I'm here in the Vox tree layer panel, let me go ahead and touch on the multi-resolution workflow in 3D Coat. It's similar in some regards to working with different subdivision levels in other 3D sculpting applications, but it works a bit differently. Instead of storing subdivision levels per layer like you would typically in a sculpting application other than 3D Coat, what you can do is at any point in time you can step down under the Voxel menu. You can go to Proxy Visualization, and you have these different levels that you can step down to. And so what 3D Coat's going to do is it's going to cache the original layer that you have. It's going to store it to the hard drive. And in its place, it's going to leave behind a lower resolution version of it, or a proxy. And so there are two ways to use this. One way is to work on a lower subdivision level, which you can, and 3D Coat is going to translate that back up. So let's say, for example, let me do some work here. I'm going to tessellate first on the head layer here. I'm going to choose extra detail. And the more I reduce my brush size, the more tessellation I'll have. You can see it's not quite as tessellated here. Okay. And when I see that little green stroke there, it's telling me steady stroke's on. In many cases, I don't want that on. So again, I'll reduce the brush size, hold the Shift key, and I can tessellate in this area. I think you'll find this type of sculpting where you can dynamically tessellate certain areas and also dynamically reduce certain areas is the future of digital sculpting. This gives you more precision and ways to optimize your mesh than traditional sculpting applications provide. Now, even though they allow you to step up and down different subdivision levels, you still have to increase the resolution across an entire object. And it's just not an optimal way of working. What I'm going to do here now is go ahead and try, let's use the gum tool. I like to use this for surface type of edits, such as pores, wrinkles, and things like that. And going to toggle wireframe off. Let's just give it kind of an elephant skin. I can hold the control key to invert if I want on the fly. I'll undo that. Okay, we're going to stop the recording right here and pick it up in the next video. So stay tuned and thank you for watching.